on September 26th, 2000, Micah was born. Our first son was born after 44 hours of labor, and then I had to get rushed to the OR for delivering him by an emergency C-section. And after that, I had weeks of incredibly painful recovery. Compare that to Micah's birth, where I was able to deliver him without a C-section and just feeling incredibly powerful. And I remember just for about 20 minutes after the birth was over, I remember just going, I did it! I did it! I did it! I was just elated because I thought that birth had been actually progressing the same way as with my oldest son. And so I thought I was going to have this same experience. And at the 25th hour, everything changed and it just went beautifully. I was up and showering. I couldn't believe it. And then just, back in bed, snuggling with my little baby boy and just feeling like, it was night and day. The whole experience was just amazingly different. The next day, I remember this distinctly. I was holding him in my arms and I was looking at his ankles and the way that his feet were kind of flopping and his ankles weren't tight. It was almost as if his legs were asleep or something. It just was different. It just kept going in my head. This is different. And I remember asking the nurse and saying, do you see how his ankles are kind of a little bit, and I couldn't express what it was that seemed odd to me. And I think because nurses are used to moms worrying about every little thing, he just calmed me. I don't think he was doing anything wrong. I think he was trying to calm a mom who has just had a baby, and he kept just saying, oh, that's fine. Yeah, that's, all babies are kind of like wiggly and jiggly, and things will tighten up over time. And yeah, that's normal. That's fine. And I remember I had this fleeting thought about fine motor skills. I remember it popped in my head and then popped right back out. And it's interesting, as parents, sometimes we have these little moments of sixth sense where it's almost like a voice in our head says, remember this. And so I did. I did remember it. But, it's his first day of living outside of my womb. There's so many other things to be worried about. I think at that moment it was just one of those things like, just watch. Well, we brought him home and he was just, in a word, angelic. I mean, absolutely beautiful. Just this perfectly still face. He hardly ever cried. He would just stare at you with these content little porcelain face with these beautiful dark eyes and have perfect peace. And he would just observe the world around him quietly. And I remember I would lay him down for a nap or for nighttime, and I would literally just lay him, tuck blankets around him, kiss him, tell him very softly that I loved him, and then I'd just stand up and look at him while he just was kind of looking at me like, okay, Mom, I'll see you tomorrow. And he wouldn't cry or fuss. He would just lay there staring. And I would think, that's different. And he wasn't a difficult baby at all. He continued to be this beautiful, calm little child. And he did cry every once in a while, but very, very rarely. And he was just so easy to keep calm and pleased. And at about 8 months old, I was with my mom. And at some point she was playing with him and she ran her finger down his arm really softly, like as if you would just run your finger along someone's cheek as a gentle caress, just really almost like a tickle. And it had the absolute opposite effect on Mikey. It was almost as if you were, kind of rubbing a cat the wrong way and making the fur go the wrong way, he tensed every muscle in his body and he let out this little grunt of like total dissatisfaction, just like, ugh. And my mom said, "Oh, did you see that?" I said, "Yeah, what was that?" And so she did it again because that's what we do, right? Is that what I thought I saw? And he tensed again. And we couldn't tell if it was like tickling him and making him feel like that, or if it was almost like it was hurting him, but he couldn't express it. And I remember thinking, I was watching him and just all of the puzzle pieces kept coming together in my mind as I would watch him, observe him over the months of him growing and changing. And all these little nuances were just, coming together, adding together. And I remember going, I don't think he's feeling that the same way that we would feel it. And of course, that immediately makes my mind think something is not wired the same way. He also didn't really like to hold people's gaze. From a very young age, if you would just kind of get into his line of sight, he would just look away. And it wasn't like he didn't freak out, he didn't scream or anything. He would just avert his eyes. And if you kind of move back into that line of sight again, he would just avert his eyes. He just would not allow you to hold his gaze. There were other little things that were, bells going off in my head, adding up one by one. He was slightly delayed with certain benchmarks for his growth patterns, but there was nothing that was super alarming yet. His speech was a little delayed. Again, those fine motor skills came back, that they weren't really improving. They were stagnating. He wasn't really doing the things that he should at that age. He had aversions to certain textures, and there's a lot more things that I can, share as the episodes go on. But every time that I would go to the doctor or talk to a nurse, they would say the same thing. It's nothing. He's fine. He'll catch up later. Don't compare him to his brother. That is the one that used to really upset me. His older brother was brilliant, just sharp, super sharp. He didn't miss a trick. His mind was like a little computer. I recognized his brother for what he is. And I would recognize Micah for what he is. And I was not confusing the two, and I was not comparing the two. There were differences, but the differences that I saw in Micah was not something that would make me upset that he wasn't like his brother. It made me upset because I knew from studying psychology at the university that there was a lot of things being slowly discovered about autism, and how they were saying at the time that if you could catch these things before the age of 3 and you could start applying therapies and techniques, the brain could actually rewire themselves. So for me, when they were telling me, "Oh, he'll catch up, just give it time," I was thinking, I'm hearing, a ticking clock, like a time bomb getting ready to go off. I know that I have a deadline, and hearing that, "Oh, we just need to give it time," was not the right thing to say to me. So beautifully, wonderfully, I had a friend at church, and she was a doctor. And I remember Micah at the time was probably around 12 to 15 months old, and she was probably around 45 years old herself. So after I explained all the things that I was seeing, she finally stopped me and said, "Listen, when I went to med school years ago, I had one class, and in that one class, one book, and in that one book, one paragraph on autism. You just graduated from university just a few years ago, and you have had way more education on autism than most of the doctors my age." So remember, she was 45 at the time. This is 20 years ago, okay? So the doctors that I were seeing were probably around her age as well. So she was just telling me, if you're seeing these things, push harder. Don't listen to what they're saying. You know your son better, and you actually know more about autism than you realize. That was all I needed because I knew what she was saying was true. I had been intimidated into thinking that doctors know best, and sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And my son's life was not something that I was willing to gamble with. I knew something was different, and now I knew I just needed to get him to the right people to help. But before that could happen, we had some other hurdles to overcome, and those were a little bit closer to home. So I'll tell you more about that in the next episode. See you tomorrow.